end?
I don't think so. It's recording.
It is recording. Okay,
Yeah.
then. All right. Well, hello and welcome back to the Chicago State University follow-up interview series on the Gardner High Impact Teaching Practices Institute that many of our faculty members attended this summer. Today's interview is with Dr. Olani Pakun Laosebikan, and we are delighted to have him here. And Dr. O, as we like to call you, would you like to share a little bit about your history at Chicago State and what you do over there in the College of Education?
Sure. So I have been at Chicago State now for going on 10 years, I believe. It's flown by so fast. I am in the Graduate Programs and Education Department, and I am the program facilitator for the Higher Education Administration program. I've been in this role now for the past 3 years. I'm also an assistant professor in the program and the department, and was recently a part of the Gardner Institute summer program. And I'm happy to talk about that experience with you here today.
Well, could you start us off by saying why you even thought about participating in the Gardner Institute?
Sure. So the spring semester for me, as it probably was for so many people, was one of trial and error, right? So we had to go online at the last second because of COVID-19. And I found myself, like so many of the faculty members across the country, trying to figure out how to take a 16-week course, or what was left of that course, and put it online. I had anxieties like so many other faculty and students, I'm sure, about what that would look like, how we would measure our course effectiveness, how we would deliver our content, and it was stressful, right? Which not taking anything away from the experience that I'm sure students had on their end as well.
Right.
But I left the spring semester concerned about the fall semester and what that would look like. I felt alone in my planning for the fall semester. I was concerned about like how to take my 16-week courses in the fall and to deliver them online. I wanted to not just have the same experience I had in the spring. I wanted to feel like going into the fall semester, I was thinking about student needs. I was also prepared to deliver the content in a manner that they would find the most receptive, right? And it would be effective. So that was why when I saw the email about the Gardner Institute, I was excited. I was so thrilled about the chance or opportunity to be a part of the class.
Yeah, I love the way they advertise the high impact online teaching practices. And
Yeah.
so I could see why that was so appealing. Could you speak initially to some kind of general takeaways that you got from the training, and then maybe you can take us into some specific applications that you've decided to implement in a course or two?
Sure. So the first thing I took away from the experience was that as an educator, as a teacher, like it's easy to forget that you're also a learner, right?
Mhm.
As a professor, I haven't taken a course in a long time. And so it was a great experience being in a classroom, even though virtual,
Mhm.
with classmates who are also professors, who are educators, and learning, right? These are skills and tools that I may have had some experience with, but not a lot, right?
Mhm.
And so being a learner again in a classroom was a fun experience, right?
Mhm.
So that was my first takeaway from it.
Yeah.
Um, and the second takeaway was being in a classroom experience with professors who are in similar institutions, right? So we're talking about HBCUs, PBIs, so they understand the experience of being educators in these institutions and the challenges our students have in general. And so I felt like the course, uh, it catered to and it spoke to some of those concerns and
Mhm.
those needs. And that was very important. I also like the fact that the course was an online course and it was designed very well. So they thought about how each week, each block would progress,
Mhm.
and it led us essentially to this end product, which was to deliver a syllabus for a course that we would teach in the fall.
Mhm.
It was very useful in that sense as well, because what we delivered was something that we would actually act upon in the fall semester. So I felt a sense of relief that I had at least one course that had been designed, for the online learner. And you asked about a specific assignment. Okay, so for my course deliverable, what I did was to address my ED 2000 course. That's my history of education course. It's a course I've taught almost every semester in my time at CSU. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can see one of the assignments that I designed.
That'd be
So one of the
great.
things
Thank you.
which I took away from the Gardner course was a openness to finding new ways for students to engage in the classroom. So typically, my 82,000 course, what I would do is I would have students participate in a discussion forum. So basically, I would put up a prompt, and they would respond to my prompt and to each other. One of the issues that I found with that was that students seemed to respond at the last second to the
Mhm.
prompts, or they would refer in a very tangential way to the readings. So they wouldn't have a direct response to the readings typically.
Mhm.
So the Gardner Institute, I think, was great because it exposed us to a whole toolbox of tech tools. So these are apps and other tools online that you can use in your classroom in your teaching. One of the tech tools that exposed us, or at least one of the teaching instructions that they exposed us to, was the use of podcast. And so I was very intrigued by the idea of using a podcast in my history course as a way to push or promote greater um, engagement in the class. So what I did was design an assignment where students would have to participate in a discussion forum, but in this case, it wouldn't be our typical discussion forum. They were asked to participate in a podcast. So they were asked to partner up with a classmate and to create a podcast on one or more readings from the week. And they would have to essentially read ahead to then come together and to discuss the readings for the week in the form of a podcast. I was a little nervous about how that would go because I know people are stuck at home. I know people's schedules are all over the place. And then I also felt that as an instructor, I guess I always have a sense of responsibility over students, right? And I wasn't sure how those engagements would go without me being present. Maybe that's just the father in me, I suppose. So I was a little nervous about that, but we talked about protocols for creating this podcast. We talked about language and considerations for each other. Um, and I felt that conversation went really well. So we had to sign up.
Could I ask you a question there for anybody watching that maybe not even sure what a podcast is? Could you explain what a podcast is?
Sure. So my understanding of a podcast is a audio recording um, that is used to or that is used to discuss or to frame a conversation or discussion. It's typically one that involves, well, not always, but in my experience, it's typically one that involves more than one person, even though you can have individual people on a podcast.
Mhm.
Um, but it's essentially a different media format, right? As opposed to a video or even a song. It's typically a conversation discussion that is recorded. I know that's a very generic
Oh,
uh,
that's very, very helpful. And I
definition.
see you've even got a link so that people could go to the Center for Teaching Research and Excellence and actually learn how to do it themselves.
Yes, yes. And that's one thing I have to also say about this experience is that it forced us to think about our assignments from the perspective of the learner, right? So thinking about, you know, not everyone knows what a podcast is or how to create one. So I tried to be understanding of that and where possible to provide instructions to help with that. Um, so we started off with the link for the podcast and how to create one, and then I had questions to guide their discussions, right? Like these questions were just the bare minimum that they had to address in order to receive credit for the assignment. But my goal beyond just these questions was to have them, one, I think, to read ahead, right? So to be prepared for this conversation and as a result for class, but then also just to share with each other, right? What I found as an instructor, sometimes you have a student in class who is quiet, right? And that could be assumed to be that they haven't read, they're not engaged. But that's to me just not be in the mind space or in the place to engage at that moment, right? And so I hope that being able to have a conversation with a classmate might, one, make them more comfortable, um, and might make them more open to discuss ideas, perspectives they had about the reading. Um, so to cut a long story short, right, I was very impressed, and I would say a little bit surprised just about the level of engagement that I had in terms of this assignment. Um, I'm not sure if I'm able to play because I'm not sure what the privacy guidelines are, but I'll just say a little bit more about it. So what I got as a result of this assignment was I had students who who did some really interesting things. So some students created their own soundtrack or like intros to the podcast. Like they had a name for the podcast. They had a soundtrack intro into the podcast. They had
Cool.
outros to the podcast. Um, I also made it possible for them to include non-students in our class. So basically, they were able to invite family members and friends to participate with them if they weren't able to get a partner from our class. But the
Uh-huh.
family members or friends also had to do the readings, right? Um, and so it was great to have people who weren't in the class who were engaging with the readings and were offering some brilliant perspectives on the readings. And I could tell that there was just a greater level of engagement with the readings because they were talking about it and they wanted to be informed. Um, I also appreciated the ability to make references to contemporary events happening, um, in the present moment. It's a history class, so I can imagine that for 18, 19-year-olds, it may not always be the easiest thing to engage with, but they found ways to do it. So I would say, as an instructor, that it's been a resounding success. I hope my students will be able to say the same thing.
Oh, you mentioned you might have some audio. If you share your screen, at the bottom of the screen share, if you click share computer sound,
Sure.
you could possibly play something if you'd like to share an audio link. Did you have an
Yeah,
example for us by chance?
I believe I do. Let me just find the right link. So we have this assignment going throughout the semester. I essentially had them sign up 3 times throughout the semester with a partner. So it gave them at least 3 opportunities to show that they were engaging with the readings. I'm just trying to find a specific week because there was one in particular that was very, uh, very well done in terms of the production. And I would add to this that, I think it was also important for my students because they got a chance to to try something they'd never done before. So I believe that no one had ever created a podcast before. So it was a first for most everyone. And
Well, that in and of itself is a pretty exciting a piece of information. And if you are so impressed with the work they've done, I heard you say you hope that the students, got something out of it. But from your observation in terms of the time and effort and creativity they put in, would you say that they got something out of it, that it increased their engagement in say a similar activity prior to when it was just a plain old discussion board?
I I would say definitely. I think what's also important about it is that it was more, it was easier as an instructor to evaluate their engagement as opposed to like a paragraph on a discussion forum, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's a very limited way, I think, to be able to engage or to evaluate a student's engagement, right? Your questions have to be so pointed or so well designed in order to elicit or solicit certain responses from students. Whereas with the podcast, like I gave them uh, a 5 to 7 minute requirement for the podcast, but they went beyond that almost every time. So I had um, like submissions that were 20 to 25 minutes, 30
Wow.
minutes sometimes, right?
Wow.
And I told them that that I was really impressed by that, because what it meant to me was that they weren't censoring their speech. They weren't trying to just meet the 5 to 7 minutes and then
Mhm.
stop it. Like they were really engaged in the process of trying to answer the questions, but to be responsive to each other, right? The questions that they were asking each other. So I really appreciated that. So to me, yes, it's been a resounding success. And I wanted to just see if I could play one of the students' submissions. Um, and please tell me if you can or can't hear this.
Okay. I can hear it.
All right, this is Johnny Acevedo.
And this is Yasmin Broy.
Welcome to our podcast. All right, so chapter 4, The Common Man and the Common School from
Are you
18.
able to increase the volume?
Sure.
This Protestant idea, the religion is all over the United States through the political process. And they have these organizations and institutions that they hoped through the education would help the minds across the country only to the Protestant vision, thus creating a moral establishment. One of the first of these was Jackson and his image as the spokesman for the ordinary white male. Mr. Jackson was a general who had defeated the British in the War of 1812 in the Battle of New Orleans and succeeded against Indians in the South. As the president had his insistence on pushing southeastern Indians across the Mississippi and into western reservations, made him a hero among the white settlers of the South and the West who were competing with the Native Americans for land. So I thought that was really interesting about Andrew Jackson. I didn't really know that he was famous for defeating the natives, and he was a hero because of that. And the common man and the common school was like this idea for everyone, for like the public. So it wasn't just referring to like one man, but everybody as a nation, the common man and the common school. But there were like two parties.
So I'll stop there. But like that was just one example. As you can tell, he had an intro to to his podcast. So yeah, it's been a fun assignment.
Oh yeah, we heard the music yeah, I heard the direct application to the readings and his own thinking yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's fantastic. And so you sound very excited about this particular practice. Did you see a spillover to the rest of the course by implementing something like this in terms of the way students were demonstrating their knowledge of other things in the course besides responding on the discussion or the podcast?
Yes and no. I think that as the instructor for the course, I had taken more time to think about other assignments in the course and design them in a similar way.
Mhm.
So I think that we might. So this assignment and perhaps one other were new assignments in the course, but the rest of them were traditional assignments. And so I think with the two assignments I just referred to a reference, I have seen a difference in terms of engagement, but with our traditional assignments, not so much. I can say that I think in terms of our discussions in the classroom that there is a greater sense of comfort and ease, right? That students, are very engaged in terms of answering questions and comments, and their discussions with each other, I think, are very comfortable because they've partnered with each other for these podcasts. So in that sense, I do see a difference. But I do see that, that with course redesign, that it's not enough to just tweak one assignment or change one assignment or add one assignment, right? That you should probably think about the entire course in terms of the assignments, as well as the design of the course, right? Like, I think it would be great to have in this course in particular, like have all the assignments have the same sort of um, engagement opportunity for students, right? Like, I look forward to this course being one where students are really doing a lot of teamwork or collaboration activities, right? I think that to me is enriching.
Well, two things come out for me. One is exactly what you just said, especially in that remote environment. You've kind of instantly created teamwork with this assignment and built in, more of that involvement. The second thing is, I wonder, would think that the Gardner Institute would have encouraged you to start small and then expand, right? You mentioned, incorporating one or two. In hindsight, you wish maybe you had done more, but is it better to start with one or two and then improve the class, moving forward? How would you recommend somebody that is really interested in making some of these changes, incorporating them into their own teaching?
Mhm. That's a good question. I think that for me, I would have wanted to approach the entire class or to like have this perspective or this philosophy infused within the entire class. Um, Part of my, I wouldn't even say reluctance, but part of my fear, I suppose, of trying something new is just that, the fear of trying something new. And so
Right.
sometimes trying them with one assignment, two assignments is a way to sort of address our own anxieties or concerns, right? Um, and I think that, for me, like one of the lessons of the Gardner Institute is that, that you don't become a better teacher by doing the same thing, especially when you know the things that you've done in the past have significant concerns, right? That education is in some way about taking risks, right? And it's about being a learner as the educator, right? Like, I think that again, that theme comes back to mind for me, right? That like
Mhm.
I'm learning just as my students are how to use podcasts. Like, I didn't really know how to use a podcast before this class. I had to teach myself, and I'm still learning from them because I didn't think about intros and outros until they started doing it. It's
Yeah.
like, hey, that's something else we can do, So I think, and I suppose just with COVID, there was this underlying need to do something comfortable, right?
Sure.
So while I was willing to take a chance with the podcast, I also wanted to kind of just stay close to home with what I already knew, because I was like, well, it's COVID. I don't know what might happen. Um, but under more ideal conditions, I think I would try to redesign the entire class in terms of the assignments and
Mhm.
to have them have the same underlying principle, which is I want student collaboration. I want the students' engagement to be clear, visible, and evident. Um, I want them to have greater ownership of the class, right? Like,
Mhm.
I don't want to be responsible entirely for content delivery. Like, I think what they just provided, and I enjoy listening to the podcast. I'm not always able to catch up with some of them because they're 20, 30 minutes long. But but like, I enjoy just like, it feels like to me like I'm in a classroom with colleagues who are having a conversation
Yes.
about the readings, which I love, you
Yes,
know.
yes, yes. And you mentioned earlier, a lot of the focus was on working with students that attend historically Black colleges or PBIs. Do you see any particular benefit for this kind of project and this kind of seems like it would, you know, like you said, maybe put more ownership of the content on the students. But any, were you aiming toward any particular educational outcomes that were kind of unique to a PBI, or could this approach be, you know, applicable across the board, or are there special benefits, would you say, for a PBI, for example?
I don't know that I can say that there's special benefits to PBI. I believe they are, but I probably just haven't given enough thought to it. What I would say is that just as an educator, as the instructor of this course, I was deeply concerned with my students' ability to engage the readings, right? Like this class has always been taught face to face. And I've always enjoyed the classroom dynamic, like being in front of a room full of students. And because it's a history course, it can sometimes be very emotionally charged and engaging because we're talking about, you know, historical events that have significant impact and influence on how we see the world. And I've always been able to mediate or facilitate those conversations because we're in person.
Yeah.
And I was very concerned about that. Like, how do we do that online? Um, and I think the podcast allowed me to not feel like I had to have so much ownership over that, right? It allowed me to place more trust in my students, right? To be able to have these mature conversations. And, you know, I think if there is something specific to PBI, I think as an instructor, perhaps it's like dispelling, I would say stereotype, or perhaps it's not as significant as a stereotype, but like dispelling assumptions we have about our students' limitations, right? Like what they can't do, and like having a greater belief and trust in their interest and their willingness to learn and to engage, you know. So I think for me, that's something I take away from this, right? Is that having them take ownership, but also me having more trust in them, right? Trusting that they will be able to figure out my instructions, that they will be able to take what I'm asking them to do and to, you know, follow through on it. But then also, like as I said, like just pure, I would even say almost joy in just how they've been able to own it in their own individual ways, like adding intros and outros and like coming up with podcast show names and just all that. Like it's been great.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it really, you could hear the confidence in that young man's voice, and you could see the application of the content. And I would imagine that's a common problem for instructors who want to really push our students to apply what they're learning and to really interact and engage with the text. Rather than parrot back what they think the instructor wants. So thank you so much for sharing that clip, because that really, you know, was a beautiful example. So as we kind of wrap up our session here, we've got about a minute and a half left, and so any recommendations that you might have to your colleagues who would like to move forward and get more involved, engaged, and more focused on implementing these high impact online teaching practices. Any recommendations beyond what you've already kind of shared about your own experience?
Yeah. You know, and so these are not just specific to individual faculty alone. I think as institutions, I think that one, we have to prioritize the training of faculty, right? In general, most faculty are not taught how to teach unless you come from a K through 12 background. You generally don't have that experience. I'll start off there. Second, even if you do come from a K through 12 background, it's important that we faculty remember that we are learners as well as educators, right? And so we have to continually try to strengthen our skills, right? The other thing I would add to that is I think that for me, what was most beneficial about the Gardner course was the classroom setting. And even though we didn't have, I mean, we had discussion sections and things like that. I think it was just the accountability somewhat of being in a classroom with other people, feeling like other people were doing their work and you had to keep up, right? That was important. But also also the feeling that as a collective, right, that we were going to have this collective impact, right? So it wasn't just me individually working on my syllabus, toiling alone in my basement on my syllabus, and then having a class with 15 students in the fall, right? But as a whole, there are hundreds of faculty on this in this course, and we're all going to go to our classrooms, and we're all going to have some kind of impact on our students, right? So that sense of a shared mission, shared goal was really important in terms of individual faculty and what they can do in their classroom. I think just having the dedicated space and time and having a framework can be a world of a difference. Because I can't tell you that I approach this some with any difference in terms of my intentions for the fall. Before this Gardner course, I had every intention to do wonderful things in my class in the fall, right? But what would those things have turned out without the Gardner? I tend to think they wouldn't have been as impactful, right? There's something to be said about having a structure, like someone who is going to point you in the right direction. If only just nudge you in the right direction, right? Too much of what we do as faculty is in isolation, is in silos, right? We think that our courses are our own, that we're, like we are contracted to teach these courses and they're solely ours, it's mine, right? But the academy to me is not supposed to operate that way. We're so like we are a collaborative, like it's supposed to be collaborative. Like we are a collection of minds, right? Who are mostly brilliant, um, it would be to our benefit and to our students' benefit, to our institution's benefit, to be able to share some of our knowledge, right? So if there is one single piece of advice I would say to anyone is, um, like reach out to your peers and see what they're doing. Ask questions about what they're doing in their classrooms. See if you can visit a classroom. This might be a great time because we're all online anyway. See if you can look at their Moodle shells or their Blackboard shells. Talk to young people too, and try to figure out how they're learning, how they're engaging the world. Is it TikTok videos and all those other kinds of things? Like, don't be afraid to learn, right? It's crazy to say that, right? Like we're PhDs and higher degrees, but sometimes I think we're afraid to learn, so.
Wow. Well, on that note, you've made just a great number of points and a lot of things that can get individuals going and maybe have some implications for our university. So I can't thank you enough for your time and for sharing this wonderful example of engagement and interactive and creativity. So thank you, Dr. O. Really
Thank you.
appreciate your time. Take good care.
All right.
Bye for now.
Thank you.